Namaste and welcome to the Global Order. I'm your host, Swareena Singh, and today we have with us Mr. Jason Isaacson. He is the Chief Policy and Political Affairs Officer at the American Jewish Committee and is also a long-time analyst of US political and strategic affairs. Sir, you've been on the Global Order many times before, where you've spoken about the Middle East, a region that we like to refer to as West Asia. So welcome back, sir.
Thank you. It's good to be back, Swareena.
Thank you, sir. I would like to start with something that has been on the news recently with regards to the US-Iran ceasefire. According to you, what in concrete terms makes the ceasefire durable rather than just, pause in hostilities, given that the issues around Iran's nuclear program as well as regional proxies remain unresolved?
Well, that's a huge question, Swareena. So let me try to pick it apart. First of all, we don't know what the deal is. There was a report that just surfaced just in the last few hours that purports to be what the text of the Memorandum of Understanding actually is. There have been rumors about it, as you know, for the last several days, and really competing narratives, competing descriptions that we would hear from the Iranians and from the Pakistanis and from various U.S. officials and a lot of people who have a stake in the outcome from other countries as well. If what I read in the last few hours, which purports to be the actual document, is in fact the actual document, it's really problematic, and it doesn't suggest to me that we are on the path to a durable peace, to an elimination of the threat that the Islamic regime of Iran has posed to regional stability and peace, and to the freedom of the Iranian people. It seems to be worse than the status quo ante of February 26th or 27th. I'm hopeful that that is not the document that will actually be signed in Geneva this weekend, this Friday. I'm hopeful that perhaps this document was leaked so that a reaction would be so profound and would resonate so loudly in the halls in various capitals, especially in Washington, that a very different document is what will be agreed to. But I don't know. Can there be a durable peace with the Islamic Republic of Iran that continues to have ambitions to advance a military nuclear program? That continues to oppress its people in the most severe fashion, that tortures and kidnaps and does all of the other atrocious things that it has been doing for 47 years to stay in power, and to deepen its grip on not only the Iranian public, but countries that it regards as somehow in its vast territory of ambition, Lebanon, Syria in the past, Iraq, Yemen. It's intolerable. If the agreement that is ultimately reached with the Islamic Republic is one that infuses billions or tens or even hundreds of billions of dollars into the coffers of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the regime in general, therefore enabling it to continue to invest in these terrorist proxies and in its military hardware and its nuclear program, it will be very bad news. It will not lead to durable Middle East peace, which was the vision that President Trump has been trying to advance and that all of us have a big investment in. If, on the other hand, what we see signed in Geneva is a ceasefire deal that opens the Strait of Hormuz, which is vital to the world, to India and to the world, not only because of the energy supplies that have been blocked, but because of fertilizer and helium and all of the other products that are going back and forth every day through the Strait of Hormuz, a vital waterway, critical waterway. It'll be good if that is opened. That's absolutely important. If there can be serious negotiations on a pathway toward an elimination of the Iranian nuclear threat, that will be hugely important if that's where we are. If, in fact, the objectives that were set out by President Trump when he spoke on February 28th as the bombs were falling in Iran. If those objectives can be realized, we will have advanced significantly. It's clear that the military actions over the last 3.5 months have degraded the military capabilities of Iran. But at the same time, we see that and destroyed much of the leadership, but a new leadership took its place. And we have seen that it has discovered a deterrent lever that is perhaps even stronger than the deterrence that they would have achieved through advancing a nuclear program, the deterrence of holding on to strangling the Strait of Hormuz and creating pain internationally and enormous political pressure on the United States. I am hopeful that these negotiations, if we get to that point, if we have a ceasefire and we get to the point of serious negotiations and continued pressure is exerted on the Iranian regime, that perhaps we can reach the objectives that were set out by President Trump. I can't say I'm full of confidence that we'll get to that point. That's what I'm hopeful will happen. And frankly, the support of the international community, including India, which has its own relationship with Iran, very important relationship, an interesting relationship, not by any means a partnership, but your neighbors, and you can't help that fact. And there is a civilizational relationship, as I've been told many times. But I would think that India and our European allies and our allies in the Arabian Gulf, the GCC countries, and others will cooperate in exerting the kind of pressure and coercion on Iran that will perhaps lead it to put forward a credible negotiating posture instead of insisting on its right to enrich, insisting on its maintenance of at least the beginnings of or at least the framework for advancing a military nuclear program. If we can get it to relinquish all of that and behave like a normal country at peace with its neighbors and not destabilizing its neighbors and trying to subvert its neighbors, we will be in a much better place. We'll see what happens over the next few months, but it's with some trepidation that I look forward to that future.
Like you said, sir, while we cannot be fully confident, it is important to be hopeful. But coming in on one of the points that you made, that if at all the deal is able to restrain Iran, then what verification and enforcement mechanisms would you consider as non-negotiable? And if there are these mechanisms, then who should be responsible for enforcing them if either sides violate the terms?
Look, in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which was negotiated and concluded in 2015, the International Atomic Energy Agency was established or was given the means to inspect, to monitor, to conduct surveillance over the nuclear program. There were constraints on the way that was to be conducted. It was a more rigorous, more liberal inspection regime than has occurred in the past, really to an unprecedented degree, but it was not airtight. And in fact, the Iranians found ways to evade certain responsibility, to mask, to hide certain activities, to hide the activities that had taken place in the years before, to advance a military program that we only found out about later on when, frankly, Israel's intelligence services were able to unearth massive trove of documents about the military nuclear program that the Iranians had been pursuing. But it was at the time regarded as an unprecedented kind of a rigorous enforcement mechanism. We will need something like that, only much more locked down, much more airtight than was agreed to in 2015. And there will have to be severe penalties for violations or suspected violations. And of course, nearly half ton of highly enriched uranium that is buried presumably under rubble in Isfahan or perhaps other locations as well in Iran will have to be destroyed. The idea that somehow it can be diluted on Iranian soil under Iranian supervision, perhaps with international inspectors watching. We are told by people who have expertise in this field that is really inadequate. It has to be destroyed. The material has to be removed from Iran. If that is the case, we also have to remember there's another 11 tons or so of less highly enriched, but still enriched uranium elsewhere in Iran that could, if the centrifuges that Iran built, maintained, advanced over the course of decades, are still in operation, that less highly enriched, but still more than 3.67%, which was set by the JCPOA, if that is also not dealt with, it will also be an opening to advancing a military program if the Iranians choose to do so. So there are a lot of questions. There will have to be really a kind of a universal inspection regime with a severe enforcement mechanism that will reimpose severe sanctions, that will really kick the Iranian regime so hard that it won't be able to advance that program and get away with it. And I know that there were certain elements of that in the 2015 agreement, which was then discarded by President Trump in 2018. But again, we need to go back to that and reinforce that significantly in order to have any assurance that Iran actually, which has a history of violating agreements, would abide by this agreement.
Right. So we do have the foundation laid somewhere or the other, but important aspects of same need to be debated. And something, like you said, a universal inspection regime still needs to be debated and established. But shifting away from this, now there is the question of Gaza. Do you believe that the Iran ceasefire creates leverage for a Gaza breakthrough, or does it risk letting Gaza war drift further without a political endgame?
Look, there's clearly a connection between Iran and Gaza. Iran, after all, the Iranian regime has been a major supporter of Hamas, and there are indications, and we've heard this from sources in Saudi Arabia, as well as in elsewhere in the Middle East, that what happened on October 7th, 2023, the atrocities committed by Hamas, the invasion of southern Israel by Hamas forces, the killing of some 1,200 people in Israel, and the kidnapping of 251 who were then held hostage for a very long time in Gaza, all of that was all part of an Iranian plan to prevent the possibility of Saudi-Israeli normalization, which was moving forward. And we've heard this from Saudi sources, American sources, and other sources, Israeli sources, that on the eve of October 7th, there were indications that Saudi-Israeli normalization was moving forward, and Iran very much wanted to stop Saudi-Israeli normalization, because Saudi-Israeli normalization, true peace, would have essentially ended the Arab-Israeli conflict. And keeping alive the Arab-Israeli conflict is very much in the interest of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which counts on turmoil and instability in the Middle East to advance its own agenda, to exert greater influence, have greater power in that region. And so what Hamas did was not an accident on October 7th. It was all part of a large plan. And can an Iran that no longer has that kind of influence, that kind of ability to support Hamas, and it becomes a normal country in the region rather than a supporter of terrorist proxies in Lebanon, in Gaza, in Yemen, in Iraq, and elsewhere, will that allow us to make real progress in Gaza? Yeah, sure. If Hamas no longer has the outside support, the funding, which a lot of which has been choked off, the supply of weapons, a lot of which has been prevented, and is allowed to basically just wither without that kind of outside support, it will be positive. There will still be issues. There is still some support for Hamas among the Gaza population. I think there's probably a majority that is fed up with Hamas and the dictatorial regime that it has run in Gaza, and the destruction that it brought on the people of Gaza, the Palestinian population, because of its attack on October 7th and what followed. So it will be positive if the Iranian issue is put to rest. It won't necessarily immediately resolve the crisis in Gaza. We really do have to get Hamas to be disarmed and to no longer exert power, influence in Gaza, and be able to advance on the agenda that was set out in the peace plan, the 20-point plan that was put forward, frankly, by President Trump last fall. which has elements that would lead to Palestinian self-governance and a return to a normal situation in Gaza with a non-Hamas and non-corrupt, therefore highly reformed, fully reformed Palestinian Authority in control going forward. We're a long way from that, but we can make progress on that front, especially if Iran no longer poses the obstacle that it has long posed.
Now, for those who believe that the ceasefire means that Iran has won, how would you respond to that?
Well, it's not clear to me that anyone has won. And again, it's hard to really come up with a full assessment of the results of this war unless we know the full details of the memorandum of understanding and basically the talking points, the guidelines, the principles that the United States will pursue as it sits down to negotiations with the Iranians through this 60-day period of negotiations. Iran will have won if at the end of the day they get hundreds of billions of dollars and have the guarantee of the United States that the United States will no longer interfere in the affairs of Iran and therefore will tolerate the repression of this tyrannical regime and its attempts to subvert its neighbors and to impose its will on its neighbors and to strike at its neighbors through terrorist proxies or other means. The United States will have won if we have a normal country in the Islamic Republic of Iran, if the country becomes a good neighbor to the countries of the Middle East and West and Central and South Asia and Central Asia. It's not easy to negotiate with Iran. I spent almost 2 weeks in the Gulf before coming to India. I'm very happy to be in Delhi again. And I vividly recall a conversation that I had just a couple of days ago in one of the Gulf countries, a very senior official who was talking about the difficulty of negotiating with the Iranians and who said to me, you have to keep in mind, this is a country where people will spend 12 years making a carpet. And if you think you're going to do something quickly in that country, with that country, remember that in 2014, 2015, the negotiations for the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action were dragged out for almost 2 years with teams of technical experts, physicists, and non-proliferation experts of various kinds, and a whole range of people with kind of deep knowledge of the region and of Iranian society and the Iranian economy. I don't know if we are bringing that army of experts to the negotiations that will begin shortly after the signing of this MOU. We need to be prepared for that kind of protracted, highly detailed negotiation with the world's best bargainers. And I hope we will not underestimate the complexity, the difficulty that the negotiations will face. It is possible that there will be success in these negotiations, but it's going to be challenging. And particularly if the MOU that was just leaked, which I hope is not the real MOU, is in fact the real MOU, then the challenge will be even more profound.
Picking up on what you said about the amount of time that it takes and how it's not easy to quickly negotiate a deal, and how you've noted the evidence in the past of violations of agreements and promises made, I think my concluding question to you would be that how do you feel about the commitments Iran has made regarding its nuclear program at this juncture?
Well, as you know, the late Ayatollah and other Iranian officials have said many times that they are not pursuing a nuclear weapon, that there's a fatwa against Iran pursuing a nuclear weapon. I don't believe them for a minute. We saw the documents that were discovered by the Israeli intelligence services when they went in a brilliant clandestine operation and managed to seize a whole truckload full of documents and blueprints and all kinds of schematic diagrams and everything else that laid out the progress that Iran was making. They stopped it, but they had been making progress toward creating a nuclear device. So to somehow take the Iranians at their word when they have done everything possible to advance toward military nuclear capability, you don't enrich uranium to 60% level for nuclear reactors, for medical isotopes, for other purposes that are sort of civilian, non-military in nature. You only advance to that degree of enrichment if you're trying to pursue a nuclear device, a military nuclear device. So I don't believe it. And for them to say in this purported MOU that they are reiterating their commitment to not obtain a nuclear weapon, great. They keep saying it, but again, these are people who are famous for saying one thing and doing another with a straight face, and I don't believe them. I don't trust them as far as I can throw them.
Right.
If you'll forgive that expression.
No, absolutely. Thank you for your candid expression. I think this does take me back to the discussion that we had about the universal regime that we need to put in place in order to inspect and enforce certain promises that are made. And it remains to be seen what comes out of the deal on Friday. But thank you so much for joining us for a conversation from your busy schedule and giving us your opinion and your perspective. Thank you and hope to have you back on Global Order soon.
Thank you, Swareena. I'd love to be back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.